I actually was arrested once for 7 hours. And well, the roads are so bad. I mean, your car just falls apart. Like everywhere you go, it's like, I think something fell off, and it's highly possible they just thought I was a rich Muslim businessman. And it was so beautiful that the Lord allowed me to just, I'm sure, only feel a piece of it. Not that I did anything, but that God crossed our paths. Mm-hmm. And it all started because we were drinking the parasite water, because I want the Bible to be clear.
This is Justin Morris, and thank you for being here.
I'm actually so excited to do this. This was just a neat opportunity. So
yeah, we get all so formal, don't we? We're recording now. But yes, so you growing up, who were you growing up?
I actually grew up in the area here in Northern California, and I rode rodeo, did a lot of martial arts. Grew up with my mom and dad taking me to church, and whenever missionaries would come to town, I just would get so excited, and it was just, I love the Lord, passionate about Him. Even in high school, had different ministries I was a part of, but missionaries, it just excited me when they come, to hear their story, to hear about, that's why I think this is so cool, because people need to hear, because we can't all get to go to so many places in the world, and and I just felt the call early on to ministry. And actually, I kind of veered from that, went to college to become a firefighter, and started kind of, and then one day the Lord was just like, just weighed on my heart. He's like, I want you to go on the mission field. And so I prayed, because I was apparently a little confused, like, I was like, but I just did all this training, and God was just so clear, and He just fell on me, and His Spirit just washed over and made it clear that I was to serve Him in full-time ministry, and missions was going to be a massive part of that. So.
That's cool. Sorry, that's cool. That's really cool. So with being a martial arts, like how many years did you do that?
I started when I was 9, because my dad realized right away that I was a horrible baseball player. And at 9, he knew there's no future for this kid. And so I started, and I did that, and I actually got a black belt by the time I was 13.
Oh,
and
wow.
then I've done a lot of just mixed martial arts throughout the years. Just various styles, and self-defense is a passion. My wife and I teach a girls' self-defense class that we've taught here in the States. We've taught it in Belize. We taught it in Kenya. So a lot of those places are very dangerous, especially for the girls. So
yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, it's weird on how God will use the skills that you were taught, even if you're a non-believer or even if you're a believer, the different skills that He won't let it go to waste. And I think that's really cool to kind of see that you're able to use something that you probably had a passion for when you're younger because you got a black belt, but it's like, it may not be like, hey, I want to go be a professional wrestler or whatever
Totally.
when you were probably in high school. But He's used it, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it is. Even now, it's a passion. Like I absolutely love training. I've backed it way off, and just focus on self-defense. But I love that God brought that in, and it gave us confidence, for a lot of places we've been.
Oh, for sure.
Not that we went anywhere to fight, but just to have the confidence, and to be able to teach my wife some stuff, and and to trust that she's equipped to a degree.
Yeah, yeah, gives you a little bit more confidence, which is a good thing.
It is, because we trust the Lord, of course. You go to different places in the world.
Yeah.
But it's nice to just have some spatial awareness, and a lot of that, just to know what your surroundings, and then at the end of the day, if somebody grabbed her, I know they'd, she's got a chance, so
yeah, but yeah, so bull riding or rodeo. What did you do on rodeo?
I rode bucking horses, so like saddle bronc and bareback, and
bareback. Wow.
Yeah, which is like a small strap, and you hold on to, and then the horses buck, and then the saddle bronc, it's a saddle and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
So I wasn't overly good, but I had a lot of fun.
If that's all it is, right?
I actually thought I was going to be a rodeo preacher for a while.
Oh, wow.
I felt where there's guys that they'll travel the circuits, and then they'll ride, and then they do Bible studies and like cowboy church and stuff. And so even as early on, like in high school, I would do some of the Bible studies at the Cottonwood rodeos, and I would pray over the rodeo grounds. The Lord, called me to do that. So I'd show up at a rodeo, and I was actually more nervous to walk up to, the big crusty cowboys, and be like, hey, I want to pray after the national anthem. And so
Oh, yeah.
and so then they'd always look at me like I was crazy, and then they never said no though. God,
Wow.
called me that, and so I was more nervous to do that
Yeah.
than to get on the bucking horse. Like once I prayed, I was like, now I'm good. Let's just go ride a bucking horse,
Yeah.
and so I got to do some neat ministry there in high school, and then of course
So what led you to want to do that prayer? Was it
it was actually it's really cool because well, I had really bad grades for a season in high school, so my dad said no rodeo for me, and so I was at my brother's high school state finals rodeo, and there was a cowboy preacher there, and we were going to Bible studies every day, and for the final rodeo, he asked at one of the Bible studies, I need somebody to do the invocation, the prayer,
okay?
and instantly I knew God wanted me to do it, and so we were camping on the rodeo grounds, and I probably walked around till midnight, 1 in the morning, just battling that decision. I didn't want to do it. I felt spiritual attack. I mean, I think it was a pivotal point in my obedience to Jesus. And right about, midnight, 1 o'clock, I submitted. I was like, Lord, I'm in. And I just felt his peace wash over me. I slept like an angel, until I woke up and then panicked that I was actually going to do this thing, And I mean, I'm not a huge man. I probably weighed, 90 pounds, And so I walked up and it was a big rodeo there, and then I prayed. Hopefully it was audible and clear, because I was so nervous.
Yeah.
And then the Lord, it was so rewarding to be obedient. It was one of those first times of true obedience. I knew this is what God wanted, and I think I was a freshman, maybe a sophomore in high school,
Wow.
and I just knew, and He just said, now do that every time.
Wow.
And so every rodeo I went to throughout high school.
Yeah.
And
Did it get easier or did it get harder or
honestly, the prayer part got easier. Like once I got up there and got the mic, but it was hard every time to go and say, "Hey, can I do the prayer?" And some
Yeah.
rodeos they knew, they just, the
here's
cottonwoods.
Justin.
Yeah, here's Justin, and they're like, he's gonna do this, and they were cool with it. But then when I travel, I just go in and I'd be like, oh. And my parents, they didn't care if I did or didn't do it really. I mean, I hope that they were blessed that I did that stuff, but that was just something the Lord gave me, and so I was just excited to do that. And then I got to do, some little, mini Bible studies at the cowboy church
Okay.
on Sunday mornings because we'd rodeo once a month. And
So how was that being within the group of the Cowboys? Were the other rodeo people your age, were they making fun of you? Did they have a respect? Did they kind of like, hey, I respect you, but hey, I'm going to do my own thing. Like, I don't want you hanging out with me. Like, what was that like?
it was kind of interesting because I think they did respect it to a degree because I was definitely an outsider. I wasn't going to do the parties. I wasn't going to be a part of a lot of the stuff. I didn't use
Mm-hmm.
the language they did, but then they would see me get on the horse and they'd see me, ride, whether I did okay or I'd get hurt, and then I'd get right back up.
Yeah.
And I think they respected that. And like John Growney, who's pretty well known here in Red Bluff, where we're at right now, or close
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
But John Growney would call me and my brother out to his ranch. He's a big stock contractor, and he goes. I mean, he's a pro stock contractor, but he would call me and my brother out to his house to ride stuff, and so I think we did build a respect.
That's cool.
And then they knew we lived for the Lord, and I think even John one time was testing me because my mom said I could ride horses but never bulls. That was one thing she was just like, she's like, you're done. And then I'm kind of the perfect size for bulls. You kind of want just a short,
Oh, really?
smaller guy because otherwise when they spin, they'll whip you off if you're taller.
Oh, okay.
And so John's like, hey, Justin, climb on this bull. I want to use you as a demonstration. He's like, I won't open the chute. I'm like, that's cool. Mom said I just can't go out the gate, And he cinched me down. He was using it as a demonstration so all the new bull riders could look. And then he looked at me and he goes, do you want me to open the gate? And it was actually a moment where I was like, everything in me was like, yeah, I really do. But I was like, I'm going to obey my mom.
Wow.
And I was like, no, my mom won't let me. And he smiled like it was a test. I think he would have kicked me off his property if I'd given in, because he's not a believer as far as I know, but I think he was testing me, or, and he was like, is this kid going to stand up to everything he claims? And
Wow.
because everything in me wanted to just be like, it's one head nod away, and they would have opened the gate.
Yeah.
But
wow.
I obeyed my mom, and I know the Lord blesses that. So
Yeah.
but yeah, I think we did have some respect there, and yeah, of course, people are gonna make fun of you when you want to stand up for the Lord. I
Yeah.
think that's just going to be part of it. So
Right. I
yeah.
I mean, doesn't the Bible tell us that that's going to
and
happen?
that's minimal persecution, you know. I mean, because
Right.
literally, as we look at people make
Mhm.
fun of us, and as we look at the world and missions, well, I mean, I know there's real persecution in the States. Absolutely, there are people that are definitely oppressed for their faith, but it is less.
Oh,
You know,
for
so I
sure.
look at that kind of stuff and I smile because I go, yeah, it's never fun to be made fun of, or it's never good to be, you know,
Yeah.
mocked or anything. But at the end of the day,
Yeah. Did you incur anything like more on the physical side when you went overseas? Like, did they burn anything, or did they kind of more physically try and intimidate you or anything
you
on
know,
that?
it was interesting because where we lived in East Africa, so I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
did a lot of missions, like short term, because the Lord called us to missions, and then I became a youth pastor at Calvary Chapel Chico,
Oh, okay.
and I thought I'm only going to be here for a little bit of time because I'm called to go on the mission field,
Yeah.
and Pastor Sam there was great. He's like, absolutely, whatever the Lord wants, and we were there for 15 years. God kept us there, and obviously I had a lot to learn,
Yeah.
but that whole time we would go to Mexico or Belize, and where we would go to in Belize was very dangerous. I mean, there was bullet holes in the side of the
Oh,
church,
wow.
and the gangs there in Belize are extremely well armed. And there were places there that you're like, hey, we're gonna go pick up kids, but don't get out of the van. We'll open the door for about 30 seconds. If the kids don't get in, we quickly drive away.
Mm-hmm.
It's not safe here.
Wow.
And
That's
so
crazy.
I think a lot of different times there was violence around us, but the Lord always protected us. Even in Juarez, we'd go to Juarez, Mexico, especially when it was really violent. I mean, it's still really violent, but at one point we even had armed guards. They had military guards around us to do the kids events that we were doing. Um,
Wow.
and it was funny because the Lord's always given us peace with that. And even me taking my wife, I mean, I'm her protector. I'm supposed to protect
Right?
her. And it's like, so
Right?
it's always like, okay, Lord, if you're calling me, we'll go. And then in Kenya where we lived was 50% Somali Muslim. And so there was two mosques near our house. We could hear them. And there were different areas where we definitely felt at times hatred, and we felt different things. And there was some terrorist attacks about 10 miles from our house. But as far as us, we never experienced anything physical,
Yeah.
but definitely had people look at us, and you could just feel the hatred, which is an interesting experience. And
Mm-hmm.
because one of the Bible colleges I taught at, and I mean, there's a mosque. They built a mosque right across the street from it,
Yeah.
and so they'd crank up their morning prayers and afternoon prayers. So sometimes when I'm teaching, it's just they're blaring them out, and when I'd walk home, it's about a mile and a half I think to walk home, and they'd look at you, and you could just sometimes feel that hatred. But we never actually had any physical, I guess, attack upon us. Which was something that we really came to grips with before moving, because we're like, even if we do, because we knew the area we were moving to, we know that East Africa by itself, especially in Kenya, the police system is just another organized gang with AK-47s, and so yeah, and and so we just had to process that, and we actually went to our church, sent us to a military training where it's a bunch of special forces
That's
men. It
cool.
was very cool, and they were doing it for missionaries. So they were like, we want to train you to do border crossings, how to deal with corruption, how to deal with police, how to be carjacked, how to be,
Wow.
abducted, and how to navigate that system. And it was kind of interesting. Our pastor, one of the pastors, called this group, and they were like, I want you to put the Morrises through it. I want you to make them suffer during this week. And I'm like, thanks, bud. And Pastor Bud, I adore him, and I'm grateful that he did that. And we prayed, Lord, help us to learn what we need to learn, because there
Mm-hmm.
is physical danger on the mission field. There are people that want to kill Christians, and we just want to know everything we can. And so the Lord allowed us to fall into some of those scenarios and really take them in. And I mean, there was one situation actually in that training before where they abducted Lisa, and I get it. We're still in America, I mean, it's like, but the Lord allowed us to kind of just understand a little piece of that. And they drug her away, and my memory is different than hers. Even when
Oh,
we talk, she's
really?
like, oh, it wasn't as intense as you thought it was. But the Lord allowed me, because in my mind, I still to this day remember them dragging her, screaming, and she's screaming. I mean, she's playing a part because I needed to learn something. But
Mm-hmm.
Lisa goes, I didn't scream. She's like, I just walked away with them. But the Lord allowed me to like just feel the moment.
Wow.
and all the guys, they came up, and these special forces, and one of them CIA, and
Crazy.
these guys were intense, and they came around, and they had fake guns, but I still to this day feel like it was real to such a degree
Wow.
that, I mean, for about a week or two after that event, I couldn't just get over it because it was so real to me, the idea of them taking my wife.
Hmm.
And, and at gunpoint, and it was such an overwhelming thing. And then when we came back, I actually called Pastor Bud, and I was like, I'm gonna need a few days. And it was a little intense. And so we took a few days, we went to the coast. I sat on the beach and cried, as I processed. And the Lord was like, you know,
Well, yeah, it's a realization that probably most people don't have to go through, of realizing that I'm going to a place where I could potentially sacrifice my wife in that situation.
yeah.
And that I think is very real,
It,
and is something that could be like, I don't even have a wife yet, but I can't even, I don't even want to picture that.
it was so overwhelming. And it was so beautiful that the Lord allowed me to just, I'm sure, only feel a piece of it. I can't say that, look, oh, I know what it means to have your wife abducted. I don't want to go
Right?
there,
Yeah, yeah.
because she never was, but he gave me just a sliver of what it would be like.
Mhm.
And and then when we came back, Pastor Bud goes, so do you still want to go? And I'm like, absolutely, with all our hearts. God is calling us. Are there some fears? Absolutely. Some people be like, oh, you're fearless. And I'm like, that's not true. No, I have some fears,
Oh yeah.
but we're going to obey.
Mhm.
And then at one point, my wife was sitting on the bed before we moved, and she was just like, well, if they do, want to kill me, she's like, I'll just tell them about Jesus and tell them it's okay. And of course I start crying again. It was a very emotional season before we went, but beautiful that I'm like, that's her heart. I wasn't dragging her on the mission field. And
Yeah, that's really
and
cool.
I think husbands and wives, to go on the mission field, you have to be together. I mean,
Mhm.
you have to have the same mind, otherwise there'll be that division. And I've seen that with missionary couples where one doesn't really want to be there, and that's not okay. I mean, and so
Yeah.
Lisa and I were at total peace. And to hear her say that was beautiful and overwhelming, because we're moving to a dangerous place. And but she got it. She's like, I'm fully invested. And
So I want to bring you back to going into the training. If you didn't do martial arts, do you think you would have still done that? If you were the baseball star or whatever, do you think God used your martial arts to kind of lead you this way, or do you think you probably still would have done it if?
it's interesting. I don't know, because one thing for me is I just want to obey God.
Mm-hmm.
So I think He allowed me to do martial arts and have maybe a little more aggressive side in some of these areas. But my heart is just to obey Jesus.
Yeah.
And so whatever He says is what I want to do, because I'd rather be in His will. And that's not always easy, at the end of the
Oh, for
day.
sure.
But
Yeah.
so I don't know, I don't know if I had done other sports or no sports, or because at the end of the day, like I don't think it's just about it's about loving Jesus. And if you fall so deeply in love with Jesus, He can say go anywhere, and we'll say okay,
Yeah.
and so. But the training itself was intense for sure, and it allowed us to really, I think put some things together, and we used it actually almost every day in Kenya as far as training with the special forces and learning, because the police there would set up, borders and, barriers with spikes that you have to drive through, and they're mostly looking for bribes and things like that. And so it taught us how to navigate a
Oh, you're
lot of,
talking about like checkpoints and
yeah,
stuff like that?
checkpoints, yeah.
Yeah.
And so they would
Yeah.
just pop those up and put big spikes down all over the road, and they're standing there with their guns and whatnot. And
Yeah.
and so and you get used to guys with AK-47s, and um, I mean, it's just I think a lot of that brought us to being okay with, dealing with that. And actually in Kenya, I got pulled over by the cops all the time.
Oh, okay.
One of the churches I would teach at, they would laugh, how many times did the police harass you this week? And other missionaries in Kenya, they're like, I've never been pulled over, or I've
Really?
never had that. And
You just have a lead foot or something.
something about me, and actually, about a month before we moved back, and I know we'll get to that, but the Lord showed me it was my beard. In East Africa, pastors don't have beards. and especially red ones, and so because certain groups, Muslim groups, will dye their beards red and stuff, and so
Oh, really?
it's highly possible they just thought I was a rich Muslim businessman, and they thought, oh, this guy will give me money, and so I would have to convince them that I was actually a pastor,
You didn't have money.
and yeah, and then of course they're like, still give us money, and I'm like, well, and of course we were like, I won't pay a bribe, at least not intentionally. There was a few times where like, oh, that wasn't real, but but at the end of the day, having the martial arts background, having that training, it helped us navigate, because they'd want to arrest me, and so they'd get in the back of our car with their guns. You just sitting back there with their AK-47s, and they're like, drive us to the police station so I can arrest you, and you're like, that's a new one, but okay, and normally about halfway there they'd get out because they realize I'm actually not going to give them any money. So
so they use it as an intimidation factor.
most of the time, yeah, it was intimidation. I actually was arrested once for 7 hours and thrown in a little
nice.
disgusting hole. Yeah, it was pretty awesome. One of the best days of my life, actually.
Do they stick you in a hole with anybody else?
It was well, we lived in Olakasasi, which is right next to Angarongay, which I know means nothing, to anybody listening, but you can't find these places on a map. But Angarongay is a pretty big populated area, and there's like a slum within that, and then it's not a lot better as it gets out. And there's some decent places in the area, but their police station is really gross. I mean, there's feces and blood all over the walls, and
Wow.
and the smell emanating out of it was pretty intense. And it was actually because my brake lights went out. So it's not like, in case anybody's panicking, it's not like because I did anything wrong, but they want to bribe, they want to get their money, and so they put me in there, and it's not an arrestable offense and all that. I mean, it's just and so I got to spend 7 hours in there, and
Well, I can imagine in a third world country anyone having their brake lights out.
Well, the roads are so bad. I mean, your car just falls apart. Like everywhere you go, it's like I think something fell off. And so yeah, it was just another opportunity. It was near Christmas, so they're trying to pad their wallets a little bit. And,
Yeah.
they see me coming with my red beard, and apparently that was the ticket. So
There you go.
lucky me. So
Yeah, you're like, hey, I lost it up here. I don't want to lose it down here.
I know. It's like I look like a shaved cat if I shave this off, and so nobody needs that.
Let's go back to your first missions. Where did you go with that?
The first mission trip I ever went on personally was when my wife and I were engaged, and the church had a little trip to Mexico to build some stuff, and I was super excited because I knew I had this call. I had given up firefighting, and so I went, and just absolutely loved everything about it. And of course, there's just little things in every trip you go on that stand out. One of them in that was just simply like they'd make us some little burritos because we were digging this septic system for an older family, so she didn't have to leave the house,
Yeah.
And so we're out there digging, and the ground's full of rocks, and a lot of the people on that particular team, they were looking more forward to the beach day and stuff, and so I wasn't super popular because I wanted to actually finish the project, and so we're digging, and then little kids would come up, and oftentimes people are giving them candy, and this little guy came through, and he looked and pointed at my burrito. And I was like, yeah, you can have my burrito. I'm like, if you walk through the candy line to get my burrito, that kid's hungry, And so other people on the team were like, you can't give him your food. And I'm like, you can't stop me. I'm like, you're not gonna stop me from giving it. And so that was like a pivotal moment where I saw his need. And I can still picture him to this day walking through, and he was just hungry.
Wow.
I'm like, I can miss a meal. I'm gonna be okay. He may not have eaten that day. I mean, who knows? And so that was just where God used that trip and those little moments, like with that kid, and even finishing the project. And I made our team miss part of the beach day because I'm like, no, we need to go finish this, And it gave me that passion to go do it for the right reason.
Yeah.
And then my wife and I got married, and we started to go, to Mexico, to Juarez, and then a need came up for a teacher at a Bible boot camp in Belize, down in Punta Gorda, which is the southernmost point. And in the jungles, there was a missionary base, and they do all these kids stuff, and they wanted somebody to come down and teach the teens some Bible college, or not Bible college, but Bible classes. And our senior pastor was like, yeah, that doesn't sound like fun to me. But he's like, I know a guy that wants to go. And I was like, yes, I'll go. And then I'm like, but where is Belize? I had to like look on the map, and I'm like, and actually that's where we met our son, was down there in Belize. And,
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, our son Carl. And so we met him down there at that first. And then, I mean, of course,
Yeah.
the Lord opened that up for him to come. And that's probably a whole story we don't have time for, but
Right. We'll catch that later.
that might be a round 2 or something. But but in the midst of just loving the Lord and serving, yeah, he brought us family.
Wow.
And he brought my wife and I closer together as we would do those trips. And it was a slow process over that 15 years of youth ministry, learning to teach, learning to grow in my understanding of God. And then he would send us a couple times a year on these short trips.
That's cool.
And then we actually thought we were going to plant a church in Belize. And I mean, I even made the T-shirt logo. I was super excited. And then the Lord just put it on our hearts to and somebody was like, hey, we want to take you to Africa. And I'm like, all right, I'll go.
Yeah.
And we just fell in love with it. And then, so I talked to my senior pastor because he knew missions was the plan. I was like, I'd like to go for a month and just really pray. Kind of like a scouting trip and a prayer trip. Mm-hmm. And I went and I taught the book of Romans at Manna Bible, this little Bible college kind of in the middle of nowhere. And it was so exhilarating, teaching, the book of Romans. And they do speak English as a culture there, but I used a translator because, they speak Swahili, but a very broken version of it. Mm-hmm. And so I had a translator, and then that month was just glorious. And when I got to the end of the book of Romans, I taught through the whole book in like 2 weeks. And so it was hours a day. And that's just my passion, is to teach. And I actually got emotional when I was coming to the end of the chapter, because I'm like, that means this trip is over. Wow. And the Lord really just showed me, he's like, this is where we're supposed to be. And so
that's cool. It
was amazing. And we got to take that month and just really soak in the culture. And you never fully learn a culture no matter how long you live there.
Right.
So
I'm still trying to figure out mine.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I look around, I'm like, what's happening? And so there I knew we would never fully get it, but our hearts were there. And so I actually gave my senior pastor 2 years after that, 2 years notice, because I was like, I knew the Lord was still giving us a window. God gives us clear on timetables.
Wow.
And so we 2 years from when I said we're going to go to when we moved. And so we moved in 2016 to Kenya, and we moved with almost no support. And
wow.
The Lord just said go, and he put it on our hearts to not ask for money. And some missionaries ask for money, and I don't think that's wrong. And some try to really, raise it. And I don't think that's right or wrong. I think it's different for everybody. But for us, he was just like, don't ask. Because I'm a provider by nature. I think most men are, but I have a very strong sense of I'll take care of my wife. If we need it, I get an extra job. I'll take care of that. And so God was teaching me something kind of epic through that. He's like, don't ask.
Yeah. Well, if you look at Paul, he went in times where people were supporting him, and then other times he was making tents and all that kind of stuff.
He was willing to work if need be, and that's always been my heart in ministry. But in Kenya, we couldn't work. I couldn't legally work without a work visa, which costs more. So if you break that, they'll kick you out, and they're real picky about that because they want their money. But
so
God,
when they pulled you over, you literally didn't have the money to give them.
So often, they look at me. They're like, they give us money. I'm like, yeah, I don't have any on me, dude. I was like, there is no money. And of course, they think I'm lying because,
yeah.
And we were in a car. Because when we moved there, it was so amazing. There was a family that just blessed us, and they gave us enough to buy tickets and get over there. And other people in the church kind of gave a little bit. And so we had like $250 a month coming in. And a lot of people think, oh, you can live off, $100 in Africa. You can't. It's like, especially if you want to be safe. We could go live in a slum, but you'd only live for a very short period of time depending on where you are. Mm-hmm. And so you have to kind of navigate that for the culture you're in. But it was kind of cool because I looked at our finances. I go, well, we moved here. We don't have any more money than maybe 2 or 3 months worth. And that was okay. I'm like, the Lord will provide or he won't. And he was a test of faith. And every month he just gave us a little bit more as far as the funding, and gave us a little bit more. And we just never asked If we sent out newsletters, this is just what the Lord's doing in our ministry. It wasn't give us money. And
wow.
And I had peace with that most of the time. There's always the struggle of like, how are we going to eat, and but
Yeah.
but God was wildly faithful in that regard, which set us free just to do ministry. It set us free just to love the people and not. I mean, obviously we weren't going to take tithe from them, but it was just like, to never worry about that. So I taught at the Bible college, and, that I had taught the book of Romans at, and I have such a passion for that little school, because pastors from East Africa come, and they do 3-week sessions, and they learn, and then they go back to their churches.
Wow.
We're so blessed here in America. We've got so much resources and so much that we can learn from, and churches that actually have pastors that might have even gone to Bible college, and it's just overwhelming. And I actually don't have a Bible college degree.
Okay.
I've taken some classes off and on and different stuff, but at the end of the day, I just got to spend a lot of time with Jesus, and the Lord raised me up. So I teach at this little Bible college, and these pastors, and some of them, they're in their 50s, their 60s, and
Wow.
and they just don't know anything. And so that was so amazing. And then we're there in East Africa, and we had a decent place to live at first, and then we took a month and did some language school and to work on Swahili, and I know enough Swahili to get in trouble.
So,
and
tell me a phrase in Swahili.
Twiga yangu alikula chakula yote.
Okay.
You want to know what that says?
No, I don't.
No, not at all. Okay.
Yeah.
My giraffe ate all my food. So, you thought I'd say something spiritual and profound. No, my giraffe ate all my food.
Well, that phrase will get you by in a pinch.
When you need it, they're like, oh, okay. The cops pull you over, you throw that out.
All right, on your way.
Yes. Oh, clearly you're a pastor. You can go. And I mean, I probably am at about a 5-year-old level.
Okay.
But because their Swahili's so broken, we learned, Kiswahili Safi, which is pure Swahili. And
wow.
like in Tanzania, pure Swahili. Kenya, it's broken. Uganda, it's pretty sick and dead. So,
But can you get by with knowing pure Swahili, where if you didn't know pure Swahili, like, do the others understand pure Swahili, or is it kind of like their own little dialect a little bit over here, and it's kind of a little harder to bounce back and forth?
They do have their regional dialects, because they'll have their tribal language, and then they'll have like a regional Shang, or broken Swahili.
Okay.
And then they do learn, like we have, English class in school, so they have like a pure Swahili class.
Oh, okay.
Most of them don't know a lot of it, so there'd be words I use, and they'd look at me and they're like, I don't know what that is. And so
wow.
we're trying to, But one of my neighbors once, he goes, how much do you get in a conversation? I go, probably about 40%. And he laughs. He's like, that's what I get. So they'll blur between English and Swahili and their Shang and maybe a tribal dialect. And so
wow.
a lot of people there. And then if you learn the Shang from like Ngadarongai, and then you go to, up country, which is, more village like we would think,
Okay.
they speak a whole different Shang.
Wow.
And so the kids are always changing the words depending on the region, and it becomes very hard.
So the locals say they move from different places. They know how to talk the other languages. It's like coming over here to America and being like, oh, they talk New Yorkan or Southern.
You start to
like
hear
that,
and they can communicate, but not know all the words.
Okay.
Because some of the words are literally different, not even just said different, but like.
So it's more like going over to England. Well, the boat.
The
You're
British
like,
English.
The boat? I have a boat.
Yes, and they speak British English there as a culture, because they were
really?
colonized.
Yeah.
And so they did. They would say, like, when we first landed and we're getting in the taxi, it's like, oh, just throw it in the boot. And I was all, throw it in the what? I was all, because I didn't expect that. And then, the trash, it's the rubbish, and you're just like, and so I always had fun with that. So you don't go and ask for a napkin at a restaurant, because that either means, like a diaper, and so you're like, I'd like a serviette, and so we learned some funny things.
Yeah.
Pants mean underwear. So you walk up and they wear different styles of clothes. You're like, oh, those are cool pants. And you're like, hey, cool underwear, man. And finally somebody was like, you gotta stop saying that. And I'm like, well, nobody told me. Like, how would I know
Right?
that pants means underwear, And
Yeah.
And so even in English, we were having to adjust
Wow.
and grow. And so I would teach with an interpreter, because because I want the Bible to be clear, you know. And then as our Swahili got better, when I would teach some of my Bible studies, I would do stories in Swahili, and sometimes they'd laugh and they'd stop and they're like, no, that's not right at all. But that's when they loved me, you know. And then, and sometimes, I mean, once I said something horribly offensive, I have no idea what it is to this day. They're believers, and I actually was just trying to say it's nice to meet you, Nina Fraha Kukatana Nawe. It's nice to meet you. And all of a sudden they were like, and I was like, oh no, what did I say? Because clearly I didn't say that. And I was like, they're like, we can't repeat it. Like, it's so inappropriate, we can't repeat it. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. And I am so sorry. And so I made lots of mistakes with the language because I was willing just to try.
Yeah.
You know, and I went to buy some flour, you know, to cook with, and I called the man. I go, you are flour, you know, you're cooking flour. And he looked at me, and so I looked at my wife, and she was better at the language than me. And I look at her, and she's all, no, that's not right. You know, I was like, sir, you are cooking flour. And he's all, what does this white guy want? You know,
those crazy Americans.
It is crazy. And so with language, it was fun because I'm like, I'm okay to be laughed at. You know, I'm okay to mess up. And some missionaries shut down. They're like, oh no, you know, I said it wrong, and they get self-conscious. And I guess that's a blessing from the Lord. And a lot of years of youth ministry, I just, you know, that helps. That really helps. And just to be okay with it. And so we would teach at the Bible colleges. And then God is so cool how he does stuff. Because like some missionaries never get sick. And so they told us on this mission base we first started Alpha, and they're like, the water's safe to drink here. Well, they meant out of one spigot on the entire base, go fill your jug there. The water that comes out of the little tap in our room, our little small room, was absolutely parasite-ridden. You know, without any question, don't drink out of that. But they said, oh, the water's good. And in their minds, they meant that one spigot. Well, we thought, well, that's fantastic. So we were drinking water by the gallon out of that spigot. But the Lord totally allowed it because we got parasites and never could really get rid of them. For 3.5 years, it was a glorious reality, you know. And so we were so sick. And then I bought some street food that gave us food poisoning, and it was like, I mean, so I was really on top of my game for a few weeks. And we were so sick, so we found a restaurant that they're like, no, this is good because Kenya has their tourism and safaris, and like, you can eat at this restaurant. So we started, you know, like, okay, well, we want to eat out, so we'd go there, but we would ask, like, how do you say this, and how do you say this? And so we're still trying to learn our Swahili, and we're sick, so we'd go to places that were maybe a little safer. And the waitress at this little place she goes, well, did you go to church today? And I was like, yeah, I'm a pastor. She got all excited, and she's like, would you do a Bible study for us?
Oh, wow.
And I was like, yeah. And so she ran off, and it took a couple weeks, so they're trying to figure out, well, what do you want from us? And I'm like, I don't want anything. I don't want money, because a lot of times there it's like, well, the pastors are very gimme, you know, and I'm like, we don't want food, we don't want anything. And so we started teaching this little Bible study, and then the guards for that area wanted a little Bible study. And so I'd get up, and when the sun was rising at like 6:30, I'd be teaching a Bible study to the guards, and this was Sunday mornings, and then I'd walk over and I'd teach a Bible study at this little restaurant.
Yeah.
And then there was another little restaurant around the corner in this area, and I was walking, and it's like one of those magical moments that you dream of as a pastor, as a missionary, and this guy runs up and grabs me. And honestly, my first response was like, you know, I mean, black belt, my natural response is like, ah, you know, and I was like, what's happening? But he grabbed me and he goes, would you come teach the Bible to us too?
Wow.
And it was just one of those moments where, I was like, yeah, I mean, and he literally held onto my arm, I think, so I didn't run away or something. And, you know, and he walked us right in, and he had his whole little kitchen staff, you know, ready. And he was like, this guy's going to teach us. He called out all the, you know, the people, and I just impromptu did a Bible study right there for him. And then I was like, you want to do this every week? And so every Sunday, I would get up and I would teach those 3 Bible studies, and then I would drive like 30, 40 minutes to the church that we normally taught at.
Wow.
And I would teach a service, you know, there.
Yeah.
And
so how many people were you in each of those groups? It
was kind of cool because the guards probably had about 20.
Oh, wow.
And then they would change in and out, you know, as because it is their job. And so we would get to this Bible study, and then they would go out to do other places. So, you know, and then the restaurants would have, you know, between 10 to 15. And and because it was kind of in that touristy area. And it was interesting because we would go to other places and we'd run into people that had been in our Bible studies at those restaurants or with the guards.
Yeah.
And so the Lord allowed, I mean, there were some Muslims in some of those groups, and they would sit there and listen. And there were, you know, it was such an amazing opportunity. And then because it was a touristy area at times, there'd be, you know, random people from around the world that show up to get a coffee or something before they went on safari, and I'm standing there in front of the kitchen just preaching away.
Wow.
And, you know, they'd kind of come in and they'd make them a coffee, and I just keep talking. It was awesome.
Wow.
And we didn't get a lot of that, but I was always excited. I'd be praying like, Lord, they're hearing your message. They're hearing the gospel. Because I would give a gospel, you know, presentation at the end, and I'm like, I mean, so I'm excited because who knows, maybe there's some person, you know, from, you know, Europe or something that I'll get to heaven and be like, I went on safari and I heard. And the Lord stirred my heart, not that I did anything, but that God crossed our paths. And it all started because we were drinking the parasite water and the kebab, the street kebab of 2016. It ruined my gut, but it opened the door for those Bible studies.
Wow.
And to get to share with them. And we did those studies for years. And so I taught at the Bible college, and then I ended up teaching at a secondary Bible college.
Wow.
And the Lord opened up ministries in different schools, because the schools there, you can just walk in. I mean, you have to get approval, but like here, if I walked up to a school, I'm like, I want to gather the whole school. I want to, you know, do a kids program. They're not going to do it. There they will. And so we were in different schools, and we would be able to preach the Word of God and share what, you know, I mean, what just isn't shared, you know? And
so how did you find time for all of this?
it was absolutely insane schedule-wise, and I loved everything about it. And the sun there, because it's, you know, pretty close to the equator, is from like 6:30 to 6:30. You can set your clock to it, and we would just go. We would just juggle all these things, and then of course you have to find time to study for all that, and my wife does have a lot of chronic pain, and so she didn't get to go to everything with me, but she would when she could, and we would, you know, we got a little motorcycle there because a lot of the roads are really bad, and we would travel around to this stuff, and then we were able to. Somebody bought us a car, you know, I mean, as the Lord provided, and it was a challenge. It was a challenge to juggle all the different ministries, but God always gave us the time. And then since I made my own schedule, it'll be like, yeah, we're taking next week off. You know, and we could kind of just rest and recuperate, and, you know, and then, I mean, we try to have kids in our home and try to just, it was truly magical. I truly enjoyed every aspect of the ministry there, and of course they run on a different timetable here in America. We're like, you know, meeting starts at 10:30, be here at 9:45, you know, and there, if the meeting starts at 10, they'll probably be there by noon. You know, and it's just like, and I was actually just Skyping.
Kenya time.
Yeah, it's Kenya time. And they would always laugh because they even call that. They're like, no, this is Kenya time, Pastor Justin. I'm like, gotcha. You know, because I'd be like, so should I actually be there at 10 or should I? And they're like,
you show up, you're like, what are you doing here so early?
Yeah, they're like, what? And they were hilarious about their time. And we had a few interns from America come out and live with us. And one of them, Mike, he's still there in Kenya.
That's awesome.
And I was Skyping in, or FaceTime, whatever it is, and the other day, and he's like, Kenya time, we're throwing a little birthday party for one of the teachers that he works with, and everybody's about 2 hours late. He's like, but that's what we expected. So
that's cool.
And so
I mean, I could fit in there really good.
I really kind of adopted it, and I loved that freedom just to not just be late, but their whole thing is while you're traveling, you should be talking to people. You know, so it's not about get from point A to point B, it's how you get from point A to point B. And
so their freeways were more stop and talk ways.
Yes, and most people walk there, or the public transportation is, we don't have time to even go into how much fun that's not. But, you know, but everything about the culture, it was a sensory overload, but to me, all in good ways, because every smell is different, the sights are different, I mean, all the languages are different, and you're hearing tons of different languages, because there's, you know, over 40 different, you know, tribes. So you got all their tribal dialects, and then all the broken Swahili, and then you just other cultures.
I can't even do English.
Seriously, you know, and most people there know 3 languages, just base. They know 3 languages, and they'd ask you, how many languages do you know? And I'm all, I'm working on English. I know a little Spanish, but only enough to, you know, get my food at Taco Bell, and which actually, is kind of a funny thing. The word taco, T-A-K-O, is unfortunately, it's a vulgarity in Swahili. And my favorite food are tacos. They'd be like, what's your favorite food? And I'm like, Mexican food. Because once I learned that was a bad word, I was like, by highly offending some people, you know.
Right.
It was like, okay, there's like so much to learn and so much crossover.
Wow.
And even in the 3.5 years that the Lord kept us there, it was truly wonderful. And a year before we moved back, and just so I can throw this in, is like, for whatever reason, the Lord said, I want you to pray about how long to be here. Because I expected to live there forever. I mean, we were invested, we were in. And I'm like, well, that's a weird thing to pray about, but okay. And then the Lord spoke to me very clearly, 12 months. And I, walked into the kitchen where my wife was, and I go, the Lord said 12 months. And she smiled, and she's like, he told me 12 months too, that we have left. And so there's something beautiful in that confirmation, but it was so challenging to want to come back. It was so much harder to come back. To me, it was a greater act of faith to come back than it was to go there.
Wow.
'Cause I didn't want to leave. And
It was a greater act of faith to come back than to go with $250 a month. Wow.
Yeah, knowing that I could get a job here, even if I wasn't a pastor, knowing my family's here, my kids are here, But it's just, our hearts were so invested, and even though with my wife's chronic pain, life was definitely harder there. But so we're like, all right, Lord, and so we just did our ministries. We talked to the people we needed to talk to, but we left almost to the day that the Lord said, because I had no peace staying after that, and I had no peace leaving before. So we just did our ministries, and we upped it to let's do as much as we can, and it was really hard. And in fact, the Lord didn't even, because I didn't even know where we were going to live. We bought plane tickets, because you have to buy them about 3 months in advance for the better prices. So we bought plane tickets, but we're like, we don't have a home. We don't have a job or a ministry, or because our sending church was like, we just don't have a place for you anymore, which was okay. I was absolutely at peace with that. It's not their fault they don't have a spot for me anymore, because my youth position was filled, and it was good to just be like, all right, Lord. And it was 2 weeks before we got on the plane, and I got a text from the church that I'm currently at that he said, do you want a temporary part-time position? Because they were in a big transition. And I was like, and the Lord was just super clear. And he was like, that's the open door. That's the one I want. I've been having you wait for. And we were like, absolutely. Red Bluff, California, temporary position. And then the Lord will show us the next step. And then we get here, and it's turned into full-time. And it's clearly where God wants us. I teach the Wednesday night adult service. I work with the youth. And hopefully, as soon as the pandemic calms itself down, I can start leading some mission trips to various places.
I'd love to join.
Yeah, I want to take trips to Kenya. Obviously, my heart's still passionate about there, but I want to go other places too. Just see what the Lord has, and
for sure.
The world needs Jesus, but even little country towns in Northern California need Jesus, and God brought us back, and it wasn't what I thought it would be. As far as, his plan for, because we were thinking missions full-time the rest of our lives, and it was okay. We had our 3.5 years, but I know he'll keep sending us. And
that's cool.
He's clear that this is where he wants us, and he's using us, and that's the main point. It's not about where in the country you are for me. Ultimately, it's, am I where God wants me to be, and am I doing his will? Am I in his plan, Yeah.
And that's awesome.
Thank you so much for having me, by the way. This has been exciting, and I know I could just talk for hours.
Yeah. I know you're on a tight time schedule, so we will wrap it up. But it was great having you. I really appreciate it.
Well, this is fantastic, and I think anytime we can encourage people about missions and what the Lord is doing, not just in our little bubbles, but around the world, because he's working everywhere. He's got a plan for every culture, and it's exciting to get that. So I can't wait to hear, the other guys and gals you have come on. So.